If you're a parent, you'll probably be horrified what this babysitter is accused of doing in Wisconsin. Her name is Hannah Sprang, and police say she left 3 children, ages 1, 2, and 2, inside an SUV with the engine turned off in the summer alone for roughly an hour and a half. And on top of that, just wait until I tell you what police say she was doing while those kids were allegedly left alone in a vehicle strapped to their car seats. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Some of the most difficult stories that we cover come in the summer months, and it's the stories that we hear of children being left alone in vehicles. And in some cases, it's because a parent or a babysitter somehow forgets that a child is in the back seat of a car. And too often, we hear these stories take the tragic turn where that young child loses their life. Now, fortunately, in the story that we're talking about today, these children appear to be okay. Their ages, though, think about how young these kids are as I tell you the details to this story. It's unbelievable. 2, 2, and 1. But what this babysitter is accused of doing in this story was allegedly no accident, according to police. This is 23-year-old Hannah Sprang making a court appearance over Zoom in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin. This picture of her Fox 11 News in Wisconsin. She's facing 3 counts of felony child neglect for what police say went down in a strip mall parking lot on July 18th, the height of the summer in the city of Manitowoc. It's on the banks of Lake Michigan. It's about an hour, 20 minutes north of Milwaukee. It's unclear who the children are who were found inside the car with their ages. Police are not going to release their identities. So at this point, we don't know what the parents have to say about what Sprang is accused of doing with their children. But Sprang advertised herself as a proper babysitter on social media. This was a post from February 2023, so a couple years ago when she was just 21 years old, but she advertised an at-home daycare for the summer months. She makes sure that she tells parents that she's CPR and first aid certified. She has kids of her own. She worked at a YMCA. She says her home is equipped with cameras so she can keep an eye on all the kids. Not to mention she has a backyard so they can run around. And then, hey, it's the summertime. She'll take your kids out to the movies, to the park. They'll go get ice cream. It sounds like a great deal. And also when you see what she charges, it's only $5 an hour, which if you're a parent and you pay for daycare, that sounds like the deal of the century. On top of that, she's also giving them meals. So in some ways, it's too good to be true. Police in Manitowoc were called to a strip mall parking lot on July 18th because someone had noticed that there was an SUV, the engine was off, and there was a child inside the car, and they witnessed that child inside the vehicle for more than an hour. Police say when they got there, the officer found that there were in fact 3 children inside that black SUV. Their ages, once again, 2, 2, and just 1 year old. 2 of them barely toddlers, 1 of them that is barely no longer a baby. The officer looked up who the vehicle was registered to, and the name came up, Hannah Sprang. The officer wrote that he was trying to find a picture of Hannah so he could go door to door, from store to store, in hopes of finding her. The officer said about 5 minutes after he arrived, Sprang exited the nail salon in the strip mall parking lot and opened the door to her vehicle. The officer then told Sprang why he was there. And this is where we start to get a sense that the officer felt that Sprang was not taking this situation seriously. The officer wrote that Sprang seemed, quote, unfazed by the fact that police were speaking with her or that she had just allegedly left 3 young kids in a car alone strapped to their car seats while she went to go get her nails done. Hannah then allegedly gave an excuse to the officer. She said, look, I made the appointment for 11 o'clock, but the salon made me wait. She said that she went in, but she would come out and check on the kids during the appointment. And that statement becomes a major red flag as this story continues on. And before I get into that part of it, let me paint the picture for you of what the officer said they saw inside of this SUV when Sprang opened the door. All 3 of these kids, ages 1, 2, and 2, were strapped to their car seats. Now, police were saying that Sprang appears to have had a tablet playing so they could watch something while she was inside getting her nails done. 1 child was facing to the front, next to them was another child facing the back, and then in this SUV there was a 3rd row, and that's where the 3rd child was. The engine of the vehicle wasn't on. And again, this was July 18th, so we're talking the height of the summer, and even though it's Wisconsin, it gets hot there. Too often we hear stories of children dying in the heat of the summer when they are left inside a car. Now, according to police, it was around 69 degrees that day, which, isn't exceptionally hot. And when they used a thermometer inside the vehicle, it showed a temperature of 81.1 degrees. And when you hear that number, you just think of especially that 1-year-old. And that is where it could be very uncomfortable. Now, police say that the children did not appear to be in physical distress, but those children were crying. And that's probably because they were left alone for roughly an hour and a half, strapped to their car seats, no adult around inside of this SUV, all of them barely toddlers. Now, the officer writes that they then asked Sprang for the 3 children's information and their parents' phone numbers. The officer wrote that Hannah, quote, was not real cooperative with me. Hannah intermittently provided information to me, however, felt the need to be texting and calling each parent prior to me having a chance to talk to them. As Hannah was notifying parents to come get their kids, police decided to fact check her alleged claim that she had gone to check on the kids multiple times during her nail appointment, so they pulled the surveillance video from that nail spot. Now, according to police, that video shows Hannah arriving at 10:49 in the morning, and the police report says that she was, quote, in the chair. So that seems to say that she was actually early for the 11 a.m. appointment she made, and she was not waiting for her appointment to begin, that she was in the chair getting her nails done. Then on top of that, it wasn't until 1 hour after she arrived that she came out to check the SUV to check on the kids. So she wasn't checking regularly through the appointment like she allegedly told the officer. She then went back inside the nail salon at 11:49, and she didn't come out again until police have arrived at 12:17. So police say the total amount of time this babysitter allegedly left her kids alone in a car with the engine turned off in the summer as she got her nails done was 1 hour and 28 minutes. The officer then writes that he called Hannah and he told her that she had provided him with misinformation and, quote, Hannah appeared to be unfazed by this information. Hannah, though, appeared to be very much fazed based on the look on her face, as you see here at that initial court appearance. This picture, once again, per Fox 11 News in Wisconsin. Each of the 3 neglect charges she is facing are Class I felonies. Those are the lowest level felonies in Wisconsin. They carry up to 3 years in prison and up to a $10,000 fine. She was given a $5,000 recognizance bond. She is next due in court September 18th for a preliminary hearing. In putting this story together, we put Hannah Sprang's name into truthfinder.com, and this is what we found. It does appear that she has a couple things that come up related to court cases dating back 2020, including this case from 2021, where she pleaded no contest to operating a motor vehicle without proof of insurance. There are a couple other traffic citations that we saw in this section of her Truthfinder profile that we were able to corroborate by looking at the Wisconsin online court records. But this is the type of thing, if you're a parent looking for a babysitter, you might type that babysitter's name into truthfinder.com and just make sure that everything adds up. At Law&Crime, we partner with Truthfinder. We use it to get details on the people involved in our stories. But as I was saying, even if you don't work in true crime, it can be an excellent resource to give you some peace of mind, as it's one of the largest public record search services in the United States. And with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Joining us now is criminal defense attorney Joe Tamburino. Joe, I know you practice law in the state of Wisconsin as well, so a great person to talk to as we're kind of breaking down just the initial part of this case. When you go through the court documents that we have, what police say they saw on scene, what sticks out to you?
Well, thanks for having me on, Chris. What sticks out is the following, that the young children in this case, the 3 of them, are less than 6 years of age, because here's the difference. If they were older than 6 years of age, this case would be charged as a misdemeanor, specifically a Class A misdemeanor. In Wisconsin, that means up to a year. But they're charged as felonies, not because the children actually received harm, but that there was a probability that their medical, emotional, or mental health needs weren't being met when they were in that car for approximately an hour and a half. So really the determining factor is the kids are so young that by statutory law, since they're under 6, this is going to be a felony.
And when you look at this, I mean, there's also, it just seems like police were very frustrated with Hannah Sprang on scene. They use the term unfazed multiple times, where they say that they, told her why they were there and that they had an issue with the children being left in the car, but she was, quote, unfazed. How does the police having that opinion of what went on impact how her case could be going forward?
It greatly impacts it because here's why. As you know from the criminal complaint that's public in this case, the police officer mentions how Ms. Sprang was uncooperative. And the reason why that's an important factor is the following. The kids in the car type of situation is unfortunately something that happens. It's not rare. I don't know how often it happens, but it does happen throughout the country. People go up to a convenience store, they have two kids, say 6 and 8 years old. They run in to pay for gas, they run in to get milk or whatever it is. Next thing they know, the kids are in the car for 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is. Not the best idea, but it does happen. But so much depends upon what is the person, the caretaker, whether it's the parent or the babysitter, whoever it is, what is their reaction when they're made aware that the kids are in the car? You'll see many cases where the person's reaction is, oh my, I didn't know it was this long. I didn't mean this. I'm so sorry. This was a bad decision, so on and so forth. But according to what we know based on the public information, is that Ms. Sprang, at least in the criminal complaint, is more concerned about texting the parents of these kids rather than checking on the kids and talking to the police about the situation.
And we don't have the body camera yet. I would love to see it. Definitely with just the information that we've been given by law enforcement thus far. But I thought that part of the criminal complaint was interesting, where the police officers like, give me the numbers for, the parents of these, one a 2-year-old and then another 2-year-old in the car. So incredibly young kids. And she's resisting. She's refusing, it seems. And I do think of a lot of situations, we see interactions with law enforcement that someone wouldn't get the opportunity to be like, wait, hold on a second. Let me just actually, I'll call them myself, do this, do that. What do you make of how police handled? And I get that maybe if we see the body camera video, we understand, but it does seem, I don't know, it just came off to me that they weren't being very forceful with her, as much as you might expect in some other situations.
Well, based on the complaint, I think the police handled it correctly. Police want to diffuse a situation, keep everyone calm. It would have been a different situation if the police, say, would have went from 0 to 60 and had her arrested or searched her or handcuffed her or taken away her phone or something like that. So I think the police were just trying to keep everybody calm. They were obviously concerned about the three young children in the car. And they just wanted to make sure that the scene was properly processed and these kids get to their parents. So I think overall, at least from what we read in the complaint, the police did a good job.
And, to your point about, I mean, we just see these stories in the summer months, especially every year. And it's in a lot of cases, they end in more cases than anybody would like. One's too many, where a child dies. Unfortunately, that's not the situation here. But we have seen cases where a parent, for some reason, will forget that their child was in the car. In this case, this was, according to police, a pretty deliberate act of leaving the children in the car. How does that impact the charges she faces and how this case could be prosecuted?
Well, as I said before, the charges are fairly standard for when the kids are less than 6 years of age. When there's a probability that their mental, physical, or emotional health is not being cared for. And if the allegations are correct, for an hour and a half being alone in a car, sure, I mean, that could definitely happen. But where it affects it is the following. When someone just simply, and it does happen, forget that the child is in the car, but they react differently. They all of a sudden they realize it. They go out there. Someone lets it known to them what's happening. It's a different situation. It's handled usually differently. Here, though, because of the deliberateness, because she went presumably to go get nails, she only checked on the kids once. It seemed like she planned all this out. Yeah, they're going to treat it differently. And specifically, they're going to treat it differently when it comes to plea negotiations. As we all know, 95% of the cases out there are plea bargain. People work out some type of deals. I'm sure in this case, the parties will engage in plea negotiations. But I think the factor of the deliberateness is something that's going to affect the plea negotiations.
And I also think too, so she said, according to police, originally was, hey, I'm coming out to check on the kids, keeping an eye on them, but then I had to wait for my nail appointment. And then they pulled the surveillance video and she only went out once in the course of an hour. When it comes to a plea negotiation and you're looking at the lack of cooperation, and the max per charge that I read was a max of 3 years on these felony neglect charges, is how does the fact that not only was she uncooperative, but then also, according to police, just lied to them about what happened, how that could impact the appetite for the DA to maybe really go hard at her in this case?
Sure, that could be a factor. But the reason why it's charged as a felony that only has basically 3.5 years penalty at the max is again because the children weren't harmed. It says right in the complaint, it's for all three counts that the harm did not occur. But when you have a situation where there's a probability of harm, where it's a probable consequence that a child under 6, that his needs for mental health, emotional, or physical safety is not being met, they can charge it. There are greater charges for child neglect in these situations, and that's all dependent upon if the child or children are harmed and what's the degree of harm going all the way to death.
How common, because for potentially in this case, you look at the police report and in the opinion of the police officer, she was not being cooperative and all these things. If she has some sort of coming to Jesus moment over the next couple of months in a plea negotiation, says, I am so sorry, I recognize this was wrong. How do those initial statements in the moment, how much weight did those carry throughout the entire process?
They carry great weight. However, you can try to really improve the case by having the defendant go through some type of therapy or mental health programming. You can avail yourself, anyone and any defendant, to certain types of mental health programming. Perhaps you need some parenting skills. You need some skills about how to care for young children. You need some skills about interaction with young children, their welfare, whatever it is. So, in a case like this, if you had a defendant, not necessarily Ms. Sprang, but anyone in this position, who went through mental health programming. Say they did that for several months and they did well at it. Sure, you could use that to try to negotiate the case down to a misdemeanor. You could try to show the prosecutor as well as the judge that though she made a big mistake originally, she recognizes the danger of her actions and she's made progress in bettering herself so that it wouldn't happen again.
She just had this initial court appearance in Wisconsin. She'll next have a preliminary hearing. How does that work? Where are we at the point as far as the process between her arrest, that initial court appearance, and then eventually, she'll either plea or then get a trial?
Well, the initial appearance is just that. It's pretty straightforward. Sometimes there's bail setting, sometimes there's not. And after that, you do go to a preliminary hearing, which is basically a probable cause hearing. So a defendant has a right in Wisconsin to have the state prove probable cause on the record. How do they do that? Usually the prosecutor will simply call the main officer in the case and have him or her testify about, what they perceived, what they experienced, and why the person was arrested. Many preliminary hearings are waived, meaning that they're set, but when you get to them, the defendant waives them. Why? Because, many times the complaint itself shows sufficient probable cause. However, any defendant has a right to have that contested hearing. After the prelim, then there'll be other types of hearings, pretrial settlement conferences, all the way to trial. Though if there is a trial setting in this case, I doubt it would happen this year. It would likely be sometime in the spring or summer of next year.
As a criminal defense attorney, how often have you had cases like this come across your desk of someone who is accused of leaving children in a car?
Not many times. I have seen it in the system, but I personally have only had a few of these. There's not a ton of these around here in Minnesota or Wisconsin, but they do happen. So thank goodness they don't happen all the time or they're really common. So personally and professionally, I've only had a couple throughout the years.
Knowing that these cases, though, we're talking about one now. They have been in the headlines, especially when they end in very, very sad and tragic situations. When you see a style of case or a type of crime start to get that attention, how does that impact the appetite within a district attorney's office of how hard you go at a defendant, and the way that they would handle a plea negotiation?
Well, I think the biggest thing for a prosecutor is threefold. Number one, the facts of the case. Number two, specifically how the defendant reacted. What is the evidence about the defendant's intent or lack thereof? And number three, what degree of harm? So, in this case, if you put all that together, fortunately, the children were not harmed. However, it does look, what it says in the complaint is true, that this was a planned act. This is something where a person presumably made an appointment to get her nails done, went to that appointment, and left the three kids in the car and only checked on them once. So I think a prosecutor is going to go through all that factors when he or she determines whether or not to offer a plea negotiation.
As you look at, I mean, as far as what we know, the evidence and you'll have the body camera, if those were running, of seeing the children in the car and the positions they were in, the temperature, they weren't hurt, but it was almost 82 degrees, which does sound, especially for a 1-year-old in a car seat, and then you have 2-year-olds as well. I mean, that just sounds like that's, something where there could have been something worse that happened. The amount of time they'll have on surveillance video, how do you see, if there were plea negotiations, like how that is going to play out?
Well, of course it's going to play out. Right now we don't have access to those
Right.
videos. I'm sure they exist. In most situations, there's body worn cameras. Many times there's squad cameras, all these different things. So, the prosecutor obviously has them and has reviewed them, and I'm sure that was part of their charging decision. And from there, depending upon how egregious the conduct is that's shown in the videos, then you have plea negotiations go accordingly.
What is like because you'll see in, and I hate to you see it in the movies, but in a plea negotiation, and it seems very quick on like Law and Order, but in real life, I mean, you sit down with a district attorney or a prosecutor, whoever it may be. What is that conversation like in a case like this, where there does seem to be a good amount of evidence against the defense attorney's client?
Well, plea negotiations aren't like TV, where all of a sudden you walk up to the prosecutor and within 2 minutes you have resolved the case. I mean, that just doesn't happen, especially in felony work. Usually what happens is both sides review the evidence that they have, and then they talk about, the strengths and weaknesses. I mean, the prosecutor, if everything in this complaint is true, has a very solid case. There's no doubt about it. So what would the defense do? Well, the defense might do something like I discussed before. Perhaps have the defendant go through mental health programming, counseling, therapy, get a specific doctor or expert to write a letter on behalf of the defendant saying that, over the last several months, she's done very well. She's progressed. She understands the nature of her actions and how they could have harmed these children, and how she's not going to do this in the future because she's gained these skills. So you use all of that to try to negotiate the case. Obviously, from a criminal defense perspective, what you want is to either see a dismissal or a lesser charge. Now, the charges right now that we have are charges which are Class I in Wisconsin, and Class I is the lowest level felony. So I'm sure if there is some type of plea negotiation, the defense would likely want a misdemeanor instead of a felony.
And then for you as a defense attorney, when you read through the police account of what happened, and if she was your client, and I think of just the moments where she seems unfazed, the handling of the phone, the surveillance video, I guess what would your advice be to a client if you had a client in this situation of how they should handle something like this?
Well, at this stage, it's too early for that because you don't have the evidence. In Wisconsin, the defense is not provided with all of what's called the discovery until after a preliminary hearing. So it would be unusual if you really tried to resolve this case at this point without having seen the evidence. Because a defense attorney, you have to do your due diligence. You're going to want to look at all the body worn cameras, squad cameras, statements, the store camera. You're going to want to look at if the medical evidence, meaning were these children seen by a doctor, and if so, did the doctor give a clean bill of health? You want to see the where the car was positioned, because There's a difference between having a car that's very close, parked close, that is, to the store, and one that's maybe, spaces or parking lots away. So all of those factors are gonna matter. Therefore, you're not gonna really try to resolve the case at this point. You're gonna want to see the evidence.
All right, Joe Tamburino, criminal defense attorney. Thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime. Great perspective on this case. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Once again, Hannah Sprang is due back in court September 18th for a preliminary hearing. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.